There we go. Yay. Okay.
And I will share the screen. Okay.
We're talking about subject matter at the moment. And as you write your op-ed, this is something you should feel strongly about. In fact, the more passionate you feel, the more likely that the op-ed will sound genuine. I get much of my information from books on a subject I want to write about, but also my own ideas, as well as information from the internet. Preferably, you should have a somewhat in-depth understanding of the subject to write an op-ed. The library is a good source of information. Also, I'd like to recommend the book, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which will give you a much different view of the history of our country than you received in the grades 1 to 12 and even in college. And that will give you a lot of ideas as to what to write about, what to criticize. If you're writing about local political matters, it may be a good idea to attend, for instance, school board meetings. And also watch videos on the subject you want to write about if they are available. And you should stick to your subject, subjects that interest you the most. In my own case, I'm interested in federal, what goes on at the federal level, but not local or state. So I don't know next to nothing about those forms of politics, but or rather, so I concentrate on the national level. You should write about subjects that affect you personally. It's a very good idea. For instance, if you're a senior, you might want to write about Social Security and pensions, because that will apply to you more so than most. What you have learned on your own might be important enough to share. Don't put too many quotes in your op-ed. Editors generally don't like that, but you should use some. And in some instances, I've noticed that it is possible to put quite a few quotes in. It all depends on the subject matter and how it's presented. 3 or 4 of my op-eds had quite a few quotes in, but only a small percentage. You should, if possible, you should write about your own district and what's going on there. And a lot of people do that. But generally make your subject personal as you can. How does it affect you personally? And what you learn that you think is important enough to share. When you write about other people, you can say pretty much anything about, as I mentioned last time, about people who are well-known, public figures. But unknown figures shouldn't be attacked. But you can attack what they write about, and that's pretty much a no-no in op-eds, is to get into argument with the opposing another op-ed writer. It's good to be not over emotional. I believe I said last time that this happened to me once, and it's one of the few times my op-ed was shut down. I started out, "How dare they?" and then went on from that. On the other hand, it's not good to be too bland either. I've seen that in a fair number of op-eds. Then it doesn't really give you incentive to keep reading. What I try to do is, frankly, I try to sock it to them in the first 2 paragraphs and lay it right on the line in a direct way. And I think that's the best way that op-eds are written. So let's go on to Ro. I think you have ideas for prompts.
But
So
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
one
there
of
were, I'm sorry, Ro, there were
Yeah.
just a couple of things I think that we
Yeah.
also talked about including, and one was about solving the problem. Dave, I think you wanted
Right.
to talk about providing solutions.
Finding solutions.
Well, we're going to go over that again
Okay.
in the outline. So
Okay.
we can move on here.
Okay, that's fine.
Dave, are
The
you
only
good?
other, the
Yeah.
only other thing that I wanted to mention is that I guess one thing that I had seen in the past in op-eds, not so much op-eds, but more like letters to the editor, was people complaining about something, but they were actually not in attendance, or it was all hearsay what they were doing. And more recently, I think the editors of op-ed and editorial letter pages have kind of become more strict and are vetting or being more careful about the things that they put in the paper. So they're not letting people just vent
Yeah.
or say stuff about something that they obviously weren't actually there. It's just a
Yeah.
rumor.
That's one of the things that will get your article rejected if you're commenting on something you read about. And so Melissa is right, and I've seen this where they talk about something that went on in a school board meeting, and they got that information from an article they read, and they weren't there, they weren't in it, and that's how it gets rejected, because you need to have firsthand information. And if you weren't there yourself, you need to talk to someone who was.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I remember years
That
ago
kind of
they had a lot more events years ago, if memory serves me right, and I haven't seen any lately.
Yes, they've made they actually announced that they were going to not have vents anymore. This is, I don't know if anybody's not familiar with this, not being around for a long time in our area, but it used to be the Intelligencer had a column on the right hand of the front page where people would just write in like 2 or 3 sentences, and they were very they were not helpful. They were basically people venting. And as over the past 3 or 4 years, that has all gotten way out of hand. And so editors have decided it's not helpful and not worthwhile, and that they should do their job as editors to provide a safe environment for people to comment respectfully.
Yeah,
okay.
that's good. Very good. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on a little bit. Dave already said, something that affects you personally. What about something that makes you angry? You look at the news in the morning, and I know I get angry most days. And so stop for a minute and ask yourself, why am I feeling angry? Why? What is happening here? And jot it down, jot your thoughts down. And there are some ideas that we could look about. One of the things Dave and I were talking one day, and he said, I want to write an article on the presidential pardon. And I want to write it because I think it's misused. And he wants to say, well, you know, like, what do you think? Don't you think that it's terribly misused? And that's a great topic, because it made him angry when certain people were pardoned who probably shouldn't be. But you have to build your story around that. But it doesn't always have to be political. It could be educational as well. You can write, for example, let's say you or your son or daughter had to stay home to teach their kids during the pandemic. So an article could be about what the pandemic has taught me about the value of a teacher's job. What, and especially if it's the parent writing it, the parent writing it would be saying, oh my God, who knew? And they need to craft their article around that, around what they went through, what they found were the obstacles, what they found was enlightening. Maybe, you know, they come up with things like that.
Mhm.
So again, it doesn't have to be, it could be educational, it could be something that is informational. And another topic might be something like, you know, what about the unvaccinated? What's with that? You know, you could build a story around how the stress that it causes me from being around people who I know are unvaccinated, and how that plays out at a family gathering, at a meeting, in the workplace. So that's another possibility. I mean, there are many ways that we can, many other articles, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So let's go now to our next topic. I already said that. Okay. Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to write. Right. So the first thing, and we talked about this last week, is to know your audience. Who are you writing for? The readers. If that publication has a lot of mothers reading, and you start talking about something that concerns township officials, you have to know your audience. You want to make sure you're using the language that will appeal to the audience you're going after, as opposed to you know, whatever comes to mind, first time voters. Now, another thing I talked about last week, and I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. I want to bring another piece up. Okay, so I talked to you last week about going to the newspapers and finding out what their audience is. And every paper has something like you're seeing right in front of you. This is called their Intelligence's media guide. Some newspapers call it a media kit. Others call it the rate card. You'll just see the rate card. And it's designed really for advertisers, because an advertiser needs to know who they're appealing to, or if this is even the right publication for them. So let me show you what you can find in this. Let me see. Okay, here. So this is what, now look at the pictures. This is supposedly their audience. All right, so it looks like it's their audience, but then we see who their audience really is. And they tell you by gender. So we have a pretty good even male-female audience. But then when we come to age, or no, education, this is education. Everybody here, pretty much everybody has graduated high school, but only 24% have a bachelor or higher degree. And that's important to know that, because you have to make sure you're not going to be using jargon, you're not going to be talking. And that is not to say that people who only have a high school education are not highly educated in other ways, do not have a great vocabulary, and do not understand, but you can't take that for granted. You have to understand who you're talking to and how you frame what you're saying. So this particular publication is primarily high school only 25%. That's not insignificant, but only 25% of the readership are college grads.
Mhm.
And we do have a percentage who are not even high school grads. So these are things you need to pay attention to. Okay, now here's age. What I don't like about the way they did this is they give you a very wide spread here in the middle. So under 18 is, I didn't even know people under 18 read, but 23.4% read this paper. And then 19 to 64 years old, that to me is too wide a spread. I'd be asking the publication, if I were an advertiser, well, wait a minute, I'd like that broken down a little bit. And then 65 or older is 22%. So our median here is pretty widespread. And you just need to know this so you can put in your head this information when you're writing.
Mhm.
All right.
So, when to write?
Well, wait a second, Dave. I'm not done yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So what in the how to write, one of the things that you do if you don't do this all the time, I highly recommend creating an outline for yourself. After a while, after you've written, a dozen or more articles, you might not need to do that anymore. But in the beginning, it's a really, really good idea to do. You need to ask yourself a few questions like, what do you want to say? What is your point? Write it down and make it succinct. 3 sentences. What do I want to say? And how will you prove your point? You need to write down, what am I going to look for to prove my point? When you give proof, whether it's quotes, as David talked about before, or research material, you need 2 or 3 examples, not more, because you don't want to overburden your article with a lot of outside information, but you need that support for what you're saying, what you're talking about. You need to research it. So you're going to then write a first statement. And that first statement, and Dave mentioned this too, needs to be provocative. You're going to, if your first paragraph, that's it, they stop reading. If it hasn't grabbed them. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Now, let's say I wanted to write an article about men and the pro-life argument. Okay, that's the thought that's coming to my mind. I'll write that down. I'll worry about my headline later. Okay, so what I might say immediately, why do you think men think they can make decisions about a woman's body? Is it, but I don't want to get people angry at me right away. So I'm going to say, is it because they want to control women? They want to control women, or is it because they really feel that we mustn't abort a life, that it's important? Which of these is it? And then, so that's it. That's what I'm saying. That's my statement up front. Two possibilities. And now I'm going to make an argument about which of those 2 things could this be? And I have to build a case that I really think is because they want to control us. But I also have to address the other, you know? And so what I might talk about is, if they really care so much about that unborn child, how come once that child is born, they don't care anymore? They let women fend for themselves. They don't provide financial assistance. They don't help people who need childcare. So where are they after the baby is born? And then if I want to get really, really insightful here, or more provocative, is I would say, here's another way to look at this. What is the one thing that women can do that men cannot? One thing, there's only really one thing. And that is to give birth to a child. It's the only thing. They are powerless in that respect. How that much unconsciously, I don't think they're thinking about that at all, but how unconsciously, this is why they need to control us. So that's my whole story. But what I would have to do here is give evidence, give examples of this. I'd have to do the research on what happens to unwed mothers, what happens after they give birth, what happens to their children. I'd have to do some research to talk about maybe the psychology of power over women. Mm-hmm. So those are the things I have to do. And I've picked a provocative subject anyway, but you have to start out with something that's going to grab their attention immediately, right? I want your attention. And so that is where I recommend we go. Okay, so again, an early statement, make it provocative, and then you want to summarize, you want to wrap it up at the end. And the ending can also be somewhat provocative. You don't always have to answer the question, but you could say, looking at the evidence, what do you think? And you could even leave it that way, leaving it open as a question at the end. And it's like, you leave people with, oh, wow, that kind of idea. So, so that is how to go about it, and we'll let you ask us questions in just a minute. But let's talk for a minute. Dave, can you talk about when to write?
Yeah, sure. Everybody has a time when their energy is high and their energy is low. Now, for me, my energy is very high in the morning, and sometimes as early as 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I often get ideas that early and wake up, and I keep a notebook by my bed, and will write down some gibberish mostly that I can read the next day, and it'll help me to remember what the ideas I got. But I can maybe go for an hour. The ideas will just stream through my head, and I have most of the article written already. One time, I believe I mentioned that about 3 o'clock in the morning, I come up with a really great idea, but I was too lazy to get up and write some notes, and I forgot it completely. By the time I got up, so that was kind of a little tragic on my part. But as far as habits go, for years I made it a habit of writing every day, 7 days a week. I just felt good doing it, and of course that doesn't mean you have to do it. Also, there are times during the day, it could be at any time, when I suddenly, for no particular reason, I just have a desire to write the op-ed that I've been thinking about, or I may be reading a book where I come across some important information with regard to the article, and then it may be anytime, even in the afternoon, I may just feel like sitting down and I'll type out a first draft. So make sure you know yourself and when you're most creative and most energetic also. And that's the good time to write. Now I had an aunt who was a student, and she was a psychologist, but she thought her time to write and do that sort of thing was about midnight to 3 or 4 in the morning. So that was her prime time. So it could be any time. You don't know. You just have to know yourself and to when you're just ready to write, and it'll be at your most creative. Okay, Ro.
Okay, so I just want to add some thoughts to what Dave is talking about. And we all have different habits. You know, when you are your most creative, you know, think about it. When do thoughts come to you? And I sometimes am on a walk, or I'm in my car, or I'm somewhere where it's awkward, and I will send myself. I can't stop what I'm doing, but if I have my phone with me, I will send myself a note about an idea that just came to mind so that I don't lose it. Otherwise, you lose it, right? So send yourself. Dave talked about a notebook by the bed. I have one in several rooms so that I can jot things down so that, you know, I don't lose my ideas, or else I run to the computer. And here's another thing. When you're even writing your story, when you're writing, this happens to me all the time, some other thought comes to mind. I don't discard it. I write it and I put it at the end to save for later, because that's the seed of another article. So whenever ideas come to you, and you'll see a pattern, you'll notice a pattern of when you are your most creative and when you can. I like to kind of make it a game, you know. You can make it fun, you know. Let me think about, you know, what am I going to think about on my walk today, or make sure I have my phone with me so I can jot it down, or because I know if Bill is with me and I tell it to him, he won't remember either. So, yeah. So yeah, and you know, things like that. Okay. When you're actually writing, when you begin, this is really important. Please don't worry about your grammar. Don't worry about your sentence structure. Have your thoughts in order, and then do a brain dump. And then you can go back later and clean it up. You know, we have all kinds of apps that fix our grammar, that fix our spelling. Do not let that. And I know that, you know, I was an English teacher, and I know that when students had to think about, you know, noun, verb, object, and they had to write a perfect sentence, they couldn't write because the creativity gets stymied. So do not worry about that. Just do a brain dump, and then you can come back and find those little nuggets in your writing. So just write, put it on paper. And then you want to get the most important idea, get that out first. Yeah, and that's another thing too. A lot of times I've written for so many different magazines, and I often wrote, you know, for my clients under their name. But even when it was my byline, they would, the editor would start to make changes. Now, the publications I wrote for often would send it back to me, showing me their changes. Typically you're not going to argue with what the editor does unless he's changed your meaning. And then you can just write back and say, but you've missed, I feel like it misses my point. But as Dave has said, sometimes they won't even tell you anything. They won't write back to you. But they do have editors. There's an editorial staff, and some publications have people who will check your quotes or check your data. One more thing about when you put some research information and some data in your article, put your source. Doesn't have to be part of the article. At the end of the article, say what do footnotes, say what the source is. They're not going to include that in the op-ed, but the reason is you will be more likely to have your article accepted if they know it came from a viable source and they don't have to do the work. So help them out by giving them your sources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
So Dave, you're on.
I just thought you brought something to mind, and that is that I often get the very beginning of an article and the very end, or the very end first. And then later I'll fill in the middle part, because the essence of the article may be in the beginning and the end. And another, now if you've written your article, it's a good idea to use the, on the computer, there's an editing function for words and for spelling and for the way the sentence is written, the grammar. And you can quickly go through your what you've written with this computer editing tool and fix a lot of stuff that you haven't written correctly before. And it's amazing, I found it's amazing how many times I found the word that I thought I spelled right, which wasn't right. So it was spelled somewhat differently. So, and grammar, I sometimes happens with me. I think seems right to me, but the computer doesn't think so. So I usually, but not always, take the computer's word for it. So that's something good to do. But generally, the first I get an idea for constructive political change. That will come from while I'm reading the newspaper or reading a book, especially a book. There's so many good authors on liberal democratic thinking that, and I've read many of them. I'd recommend Tom Hartman if you're going to be writing on a continual basis, because he's written, I don't know, 15 or 20 fairly not that long books, and they're very good about almost every political problem that's in the United States. Which brings me to a really incredibly good quote that I think I said last week that you shouldn't necessarily put quotes at the beginning, but this person did yesterday or the day before, and was a quote by Lincoln. And it said, if the United States, to the effect that if the United States fails, it won't be from abroad, it will be from inside the country. And it was, of course, it was said much better than that, but it worked and the editor let it there. So he must have liked it too.
So Dave, did you want to talk a little bit more about editing?
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah. As far as writing on the typewriter, I'd say use a computer. Don't write longhand. It's much harder. Also, something about editing is important. After you've written the article that day, do me a favor and don't send it out the same day. Because the next day you're going to pick it up and say, oh my God, I forgot to put this in, or this is wrong. And then in the case of the Courier Times, you have to rewrite it all over again. That's the way, that's their policy. There was their policy. You have to start from, I mean, you keep everything the same except for what you have to change, but they don't change it themselves for some reason. At that time, I think that's changed in the last 6 months, but there were a number of times when I had to rewrite, not retype, but add additions because I sent out the article too quickly. Now I wait for 2 or 3 days at least. And it's really important. My wife was very astute at political information and philosophy, and I didn't read anything. I didn't read anything I wrote to her aloud, but I let her, which is also a good idea. But I often let her read it, and she often, or at least fairly often, come up with a way to say something better, or more likely some information that I let out of the article. So two heads are always better than one, especially in this business. It's so complex. It's easy to make an error. And I have to sadly admit that I've made a few. As far as the audience goes, I write in the vernacular because I don't. My ideas are always, well, generally general. I don't write don't write for any specific audience, just everybody who's out there. So I don't have much of a worry about that. But as has been said, as Rose said, that you have to be careful of your audience and adjust your writing accordingly. And I'll say something about style. For me, that comes naturally. I just sit down and write the way I always do, but you may have to adjust it according to your audience. As I believe Rose said, and that's true. I'm not a specialist, so that's not one of my worries, but there are some people who do write fairly technical stuff on op-eds, and I've noticed that they use the somewhat technical language. There's another note to have. Okay.
Dave, I have a suggestion. Why don't we show everyone your article?
Good idea. Good idea.
Right? Okay, so I'm going to bring that up. I don't, I have to figure out if I always have to stop share, if I can just switch. But
I think if you share your screen,
yeah,
your
I don't
desktop,
have to.
you
Right,
don't have
right,
to.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, too late. All right, so here is one of Dave's articles. So Dave, if you can go through some but before you start, I just want to ask everyone if you can give us an extra 10 minutes tonight, because we want to hear from you as well. So I'd like us to go through Dave's article, and then I'd like to get what's on your mind. We'd like to hear what's on your mind, any questions you have, and so on. So Dave, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, this is a general setup for the for a op-ed. You put your address, your phone number, and your email on the right-hand side, as I've done. You can see words has been number of words for an article has changed to 600 now. But for a long time it was 700. So I wrote this at that time. But you put the number of words on the left so the editor can see if you've written the right number of words. Now, this case, I wrote 18 more than I should have, but he let me get away with it. So that was good. Type Times New Roman is generally the 12-point preferred style. It's double spaced, as you see. Oh, I want to mention about the title. They won't use the title. The reason for that, they won't use your title very rarely, because newspapers are in 1, 2, and 3 columns, and they don't know whether they're going to be, the article is going to be on 1 column or 2 columns, or sometimes even on 3. So they always adjust and put it in a new title to your article according to how many columns they use. So it could be used longer or shorter, but it's going to be different. So you don't have to worry a great deal about that. Now I'll just leave the rest for you to look over.
So why don't we all read this and read it to yourself, because I think it's better if you do, in that's the way you would see it in the newspaper than us reading it out loud. And so I'll put a couple of paragraphs up and explaining what he was doing in this. And when you're done, would you just either raise your hand or do a hand raise from the reactions, from the Zoom reactions, so that I'll know when to scroll.
Oh, by the way, I'll be sending this to you online in the next few days, along with 4 of the other op-eds I've written to give you a good idea on how it's done, so that you can read those and study them.
You can scroll if you like, for me.
All right, but yeah, all right, but there are others who who are not finished yet. So I'm looking for a couple more hands.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. So you can go here. Okay. I'll go up one more paragraph.
Yes.
And here is the ending. Okay.
Yeah, you just suck it to them.
You know what, Dave, I just have to tell you that I love you because I haven't heard that expression in about 40 years,
Do.
maybe 50. I don't know.
maybe.
Hmm.
Okay, everybody done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to stop the share. We're going to come back on together and let's chat. Tell us, maybe you have an idea for a story or for an article that's burning.
Well, my first question is, David, you normally put in the red type with, so that they can tell what the thing or not.
I know,
No.
I put that in so that's to show you his process.
His process. Okay, that's
Yes,
what I wasn't
yes.
sure about.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question I had is, being a sort of a visual person, and knowing when I look at those op-eds in the paper, I'll, as you say, I'll start reading them and then it looks like it gets too technical and complicated and there's nothing that really stands out and I'm not that interested, so I'll stop reading it. But probably the writing process would never include like formatting, like that's all up to the paper, right? The only
Yeah.
thing that you provide is the words.
Absolutely, yeah. The paper. does
No
all of that.
illustrations, nothing like that.
Oh yeah. Yes. You can send in a photo and hope that they might use it if it's appropriate. In fact, just I guess a month or two ago, I wrote an article and they put in a photograph.
Their own, though.
Their
Yeah.
own though, yeah. Their own. So you never know.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're interested in the topics that they've been covering as well. So if they get an article that appeals their audience and that has been about the type of things they've been talking about, yeah, they might very well, they might have a picture hanging around that works.
Mhm.
But it's unlikely. You
Yeah,
rarely
it's
see it
unlikely.
once in a while. It's rare though, because they don't have the room,
Yeah.
They need to
Right.
save space for the advertisers.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
They don't have enough advertisers, right?
Right, that's right.
Actually, there were two little things that I think I wanted to add into what we said earlier. And one was on the editing side, and it kind of fits in here what we were talking about, making things fit. And sometimes I know I have a tendency to write long sentences. It's like it's because I read too much Jane Austen at a young age or something like that. I want to write sentences that go on and on and on, and they aren't really good for this particular setting. So I think if we can go back and review what we've written and try to write it shorter, just try to do version after version until it's pithy.
Yes, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
exactly what they want. And
Right.
yeah, I had an editor who used to say, just skip every other word.
Right.
Wow.
Make it short, make it sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
In writing class, they used to say, tighten this article.
Yeah. That's right.
'Cause there's always a lot of words that aren't really necessary if you look at
Yeah.
it closely.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
good point.
Yeah, too many adjectives, you only need one to say, that person is great. Oh, the greatest person on the face of the earth, great is enough,
Yeah.
Um, Unless I'm talking about you, Bill, not to worry.
Yeah, right. So I have a
Oh, the
question.
adjective she uses, Bill.
Now, as some of the adjectives she uses, you can't print. So I do have a question. At one time, maybe back in the Stone Ages, there was a tool that you could use to figure out the grade level at which you had written.
Yes, yes, I remember that.
Are those still around?
Mhm.
I don't know.
I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
them.
That must have been when we were doing the cave art.
Yeah, probably.
Back in
No,
those
I
days.
yeah, I remember that though, Bill.
You're
I
thinking
do.
about those reading tests that
No,
you used
no,
to
I'm not.
read,
No,
and they would tell
No.
you what grade
No,
level you were at.
There was a procedure that you could
Yeah.
take what you had written and you could gauge at what level,
Yes.
your reader had to be in order to comprehend what you were saying.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, never mind. It's obviously they're
Oh, we
not
can-
around anymore.
Oh,
There's got to
it can
be
be
an app
found.
for that. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
be an app.
I'm sure there is.
So one other quick question, and it was kind of interesting. I noticed something in Dave's article when I was reading that question is kind of like, how much do you want to provoke people while you're making a point?
Mhm.
Because in reading the article, Dave alluded to how great would it be if everybody got a college education? And there is a segment of the population that might object to that comment because they're not interested in college, right? I want to be a Mason.
Mhm.
I don't need to go to college to be a Mason.
I probably should have said it differently. I used something like those who want to go to college.
Yeah, well, I was
Yeah.
just curious whether that was a technique to kind of like get people thinking, or whether that was just,
It's just a little slobby, frankly.
Well,
I
it's
should have
really,
used-
everyone should have the opportunity if that's.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I agree. It was just a subtlety that I noticed when I was reading through Dave's thing, and I said, wonder if he did that intentionally.
Yeah, well, it's a good one because you're right. You have, again, to your audience, you want to, especially now, he didn't write this for the intelligentsia, but the one we just looked at the data.
Right.
Most of the people who read that aren't college grads. So
Right.
that's not something you'd probably want to even write for that paper.
Yeah. I
At all.
kind of remember at one time someone saying something written for the newspaper should be on a 4th grade level. Now that might have been like 20 years ago, but I remember it was supposed to be very
Mhm.
clear and nothing, but I don't know if that still holds true.
The famous Denzel Washington quote, "Talk to me like I'm a 6-year-old."
Oh, okay.
Explain it like I'm a 6-year-old. You need to be very clear. Yes, you need to be, you don't have to use big words, and you don't want to use big words because you broaden your audience that way. You don't want to be erudite,
Mhm.
as an example. So that it's you're right, Pat. You need to, maybe not on a 4th grade level, but certainly not on, you don't want to start to reach too high.
Right.
And it's really easy. You can make the same point with simple language that you can make with fancy
Mhm.
words,
Mhm.
maybe even stronger.
See, that's where that tool would come in handy.
Well,
Mhm.
Susie found it.
Mhm.
Well, I found something I haven't looked at. I just
Yeah, well,
Googled
we'll
it.
have to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, it says Microsoft support. Get
How
your
about that?
documents readability and level statistics.
Huh.
Blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
Cool.
Leave it to
Researcher
Microsoft.
extraordinaire, Susie. That was fast.
Not as fast as one of the decorators in today's decorating meeting who managed to telephone the younger florist place while she was almost while she was talking and get a whole bunch of information from them and send it back. It's a new world, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
yeah.
So any ideas that you all might have for a op-ed, just to throw it out, if you have something, that you want to play with?
Well, my
Good.
pet thing is I didn't mean to interrupt, is something nobody else probably has ever, well, thought of, but getting detention basins planted with native plants everywhere.
I
And
think that's a great article to write, the
Mhm.
information article. I think that's a fabulous one.
you'd have to
You know,
get
we're
more.
talking about, it would have been good to do it for Earth Week,
Mhm.
but it doesn't matter. Climate change issues are always on the table. So yeah, go for it. I think you
Mhm.
should.
Mhm.
That's a great subject, because as we said before, it doesn't always have to be political. It doesn't always have to be, it could be informative. It could be how you can make, your, the place where you live healthier, happier. And
Mhm.
It's also involved, as Melissa and I've been studying this, the flood levels at new ones at the fellowship. And if that was done everywhere, it would help with water management.
management. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh,
There's so
Yeah.
much to write about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had
yeah.
another sort of educational one. So they're doing a PFAS clinical study, a PFAS exposure clinical study across
What's
7
PFAS?
sites. PFAS is the fluorinated forever chemicals that come
Oh.
from the firefighting foams and that have contaminated the
Ah.
water.
Mhm, mhm.
So there's 7 sites across the state and 1 across the country, one of which is Horsham. So I am a participant in that clinical study, and they're hoping to get like 1,000 people from each site, and they haven't yet met that number of participants. So
I haven't. I was thinking of
no,
volunteering too, but
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
Melissa, I just have one question for you.
yeah.
Do you ever sleep?
yeah, she's a dynamo.
I just keep doing a little bit every day. That's all.
A little.
but yeah, so I was thinking of writing an article because they're trying to get people, and people may think they have to be sick in order to participate. That's not it. We're just trying to get a broad, people across the area to participate. So I was thinking of writing something about that to encourage people to, and they're trying to get kids also, and they have like hardly any kids participating.
So in our next 2 classes, what we'd like to do is be able to provide feedback to you. So in order for us to do that, that means you have to write something. So we're asking you to write an article. It doesn't even have to be 600 words. You can write it at any length, and we can always talk about how to lengthen or how to shorten. And you can have it for us next time, and we're not going to meet for 2 weeks,
Mhm.
right? So our next meeting is what, the 12th of May?
I think that's right.
And you can contact Melissa, me, or Dave as you go along. And if you have any questions, or if you get stuck.
Mhm. I liked what we were talking about earlier too, Ro, where you're saying, is it something that makes you angry? Because when we're angry, it's because our sort of moral bell tone is being rung, right?
Yeah.
There's something that really offends our sense of right. That's what makes us angry, or our sense of fairness. And if we can kind of focus on that anger and try to figure out what the source of it is, and express why we feel the way we do, I think that can really help us understand what our values are, what
Yeah.
our spirit is telling us is important.
But the caution about that too is you can't be angry in your article.
Right.
So what
Yes.
you need to do is get that anger, filter it down, and make it into a logical argument. What Dave was doing with education, for free education.
Mhm.
But there are some things that when Dave was talking to me about presidential pardon, he sounded angry. I think it was right after Trump pardoned Bannon or one of his cronies.
Yeah, yeah.
But Flynn, maybe, I don't know, somebody who really, and you have to look back in history.
Roger Stone, probably.
What did other presidents do? What did other presidents do? Did they handle it well or not? Or is he angry just because Trump cleared criminals, really serious criminals? So
Well, there have been others, yeah.
well, that's, I'm
President,
not
yeah.
familiar, but so Dave already has his wheels turning on that. So
That's a good one. Well, that's one of you write
yeah.
it.
I just want to give Nora a chance, since her picture isn't up, it might be more difficult for her to hold up her hand or jump in. Nora, did you want to say anything or ask a question?
Oh, nothing comes to mind. Thank you, though, for
Okay.
addressing me.
Okay.
Well,
So
Trump's, oh,
are we, so this is a homework assignment? Is that what you're
Yes.
telling us?
yeah.
Yes.
And what do we do with it?
You
So
send
you
it
can
to Melissa.
Yeah, send when you're ready to send something to, and again, it's not, we understand it's not finished, it's not polished, whatever. You can just send whatever you feel comfortable sending to me. I will send it on to Ro and Dave, and we'll all take a look at it, and then we'll figure out like how many, how to handle it will really depend on the number of people that actually respond, because we know like Bill and Tality and David also wanted to share something. So we'll have to figure out like how we work our way
Yeah,
through
yeah,
the next
yeah.
session, but we'll just see what, you folks come up with, and then we'll decide, how best to handle it there. And you can tell us what you're comfortable with sharing, with the group also. So
Right.
we don't
If
want
you
to put
want it to be private so that
We
it's
can
just
do that.
one-on-one, you could do that as well if you'd rather it be one-on-one. Or we would like a couple to have here, to discuss for the group, so that, because that's how we learn,
Right.
So, all right.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
gonna
thank you
stop
very much
the
again
record
for
button.
Thank you, guys.